Adam. We're not dealing with the days of Daniel. We are looking at men in the 21st century.
Thank you, Elder Blackwood. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Good evening, church. The question is, what is our purpose? And I'll say to you that psychology and sociology do a very poor job of answering that question. It's not their area of expertise. Philosophy and theology does a much better job. And I'll leave that up to the other speakers. But what I can offer is to change the word purpose to what is man's role. What is his role in the family? What is his role in the community? What is his role overall? And as I went through the literature around this, I noticed that from the dawn of humanity, there's been some consistent things that have been asked of man, or what has been described as a man's role. This also cuts across cultures. So regardless of whether you're in the East, the West, indigenous, doesn't matter where you come from, it seems as though there are certain things that are consistent. And the two things that are always there in terms of a man's role is to be a provider and a protector. However, those roles are fulfilled quite differently through time and across culture. So for example, if we were to go back to, let's say, Greek and Roman times, the role of a man back then was to acquire property, to set limits within family and maintain a hierarchy, and to fulfill roles that were dictated by certain segments of Roman society and Greek society. If you move to the East, and Confucius influenced Eastern cultures, the role of a man there was to be the head of the household, maintain family norms, preserve the hierarchy of the family and the community. In certain traditional African communities, again across time, in addition to providing and protecting, the man was expected to preserve rituals and conduct and perpetuate certain tasks that would ensure that boys went into manhood properly. Also, they were charged with maintaining contact with ancestors so that ancestors would protect and nurture the current culture. And lastly, what was consistent across all African cultures was the caring of the land and all who inhabited the land. If you look at indigenous American cultures, there was a slight difference in how the man performed his role. He was to find complementarity between himself and the woman, as opposed to competing or even compatibility. It was complementarity that was sought. And this complementarity ensured the family's survival and prosperity and the continuation of the tribe. I mentioned the West before. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the church, Christianity, really began to flourish, even though it was there in the Roman Empire, but it changed. And the West moved from the dominance of Rome into feudal times. And with the introduction of Christianity, two things began to happen. Men moved away from the warrior type of mentality that was dominant in Rome to now populating churches as priests, monks, and other roles that made sure that Christianity spread. And there were several strains of this, some of them leading to where we are right now in the Adventist Church, and others veered off into other practices that we don't agree with. And as you move through the feudal times into the Middle Ages, into the Enlightenment, the roles of men changed a few times. And it went back and forth from being very physically dominant and very patriarchal to one where they move their power from land and power to acquiring political, spiritual, and social powers, the power to influence our society. At one point, the church became the dominant governing body in the West. So again, with the increase of men in clergy and the move from power, physical power, to one of influence, the role of men became one of, again, preserving the hierarchy, maintaining their dominance in society, primarily over women, and maintaining dominance over those who they enslaved. And they were determined, they had sole judgment as to who would live or die. It was quite possible for them to kill a wife or even the child, and very few questions would be asked as you move through these stages. So when the Enlightenment came about, and the scientific revolution, and eventually the industrial revolution, things once again changed, and men took on the role of being breadwinners. So they didn't have to go out and fight or gather, work in the fields. They moved into cities and had to acquire skills that require thinking as opposed to force. So they became breadwinners, and their value was measured by how good they were as a breadwinner. That breadwinning role included protecting the family from poverty. So they fulfilled the role by being providers and protectors. And that brought us to pretty much, I'm going to jump over a huge span of time to where we are right now. The current role or perception as to the man's role in our society began actually after World War II. Okay? If you remember from your studies, America was the dominant social and military power in the world at that time, and it had victory over tyranny. And with the return of the GIs from the Pacific and from Europe, the GI Bill was passed, allowing men to be rewarded for saving democracy and fighting against tyranny. That bill allowed, mostly unfortunately, white males to acquire support from the government to build what has become the middle class in America, the way we know it today. With those resources, they were able to get mortgages, get mortgages, go to school for a very, very low fee, and in buying the homes that they were able to buy, a new phenomenon developed, which was it was beginning to take root in the 20s and 30s, but it really blossomed after World War II, which is the suburbs. And the first major suburb in the United States is right here in New York State, Levittown. So Levittown is out there on Long Island, far from Manhattan, and with government assistance and Mr. Levitt, who was the primary builder at the time, they built thousands of homes for these returning GIs. Now, to get to Levittown, you needed to have a highway. And to use the highway, you needed to have cars to get to Levittown. With the urging of General Motors, which was the largest car company in the world at the time, they convinced the government to finish the Long Island Expressway, thereby completing the entire circle of moving out to Long Island, owning a home, buying a car for a very, very low price, and starting your family. Okay? And manhood was defined by your ability to get a good job, move up in your profession or your trade, earn a salary that allowed your wife to stay home and have children, participate in civil organizations such as the Lions Club and Rotary Club, and be a good American. You were also required to suppress your feelings and become very stoic and just be like John Wayne. John Wayne became the symbol of American manhood for decades. Unfortunately, for decades. Unfortunately, towards the end of the 1950s, the effect of the civil rights movement changed and threatened this group's sense of manhood and entitlement over a number of things, starting with 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. We then go into the 60s, and with the Cultural Revolution, hippies, the Vietnam War, and for the first time in American history, America was not victorious in a war. Again, a huge threat to American sense of manhood. John Wayne, Charlton Heston, these images of manhood began to fade in their influence over American culture. Okay? A number of things happened. Again, I'm jumping over many, many important points, but I think you might get the idea. Then came Richard Nixon, who decided that with the rise of civil rights and the threat that civil rights had for traditional John Wayne influenced or reflected manhood, he decided that he was going to do something to change things back to the way it was. And he developed this Southern strategy, which was to get the Southern states, which were heavily religious as opposed to the North, they were more religious in the North, and where they felt that they can get that population to sort of push things back a little bit. When he came into power, there was this notion that the Southern influence or the Southern perception or image of what a man is would prevail. Unfortunately, that did not happen. An important event, again in history, in 1976, the Supreme Court revoked the tax-exempt status of Bob Jones University, which was a segregated university, Christian university, that fought integration from 1954. Okay? When that happened, what was called the moral majority surfaced, and our current political state started back then. Now, what does this have to do with manhood? Well, some of you might have heard the last several years of this phenomenon called, how can I describe it? It's a hyper-masculinity. And this hyper-masculinity is not just an attempt to shape society or the secular aspects of society. It's a way to convey or convert what a few people's idea of manhood is. And those few people come from what is now referred to as the white Christian evangelicals. Okay? And I want to emphasize white Christian evangelicals. Their view of Jesus Christ is, as Doug Wilson, who is a theologian and academic, and very well-read and recognized person in this country, he said, "My Jesus does not wear a dress," referring to the traditional image of Jesus Christ in his robes. To him and his followers, and well, not just his followers, but the people who are of that mindset, the Jesus Christ that we worship in this church is a wimp. He wears a dress, he turns the other cheek, he is not a warrior. So there's a huge segment of our population right now that has the idea that to be a man means that you have to be the kind of man that the Romans and Greeks worshipped. Dominance over the female, dominance over children, and have the right to determine whether they live or die. That's to the extreme. So that's sort of the foundation as to what manhood is being perceived at by a huge segment of our population. From the psychological point of view, a man can be a warrior. He can do a number of things, but in terms of psychology, a man is determined by his ability to affect his immediate environment and the manner in which he interacts with others and how he perceives himself. So let me just go very quickly about some of the roles that the field of psychology and other similar disciplines see men. First, as a husband. A husband takes initiative and invests in his wife. Okay? He finds her first before she finds him. He initiates almost everything, which means that if he wants to go to dinner, he initiates that. He initiates compliments. He doesn't wait to be complimented. He compliments her. He leads in these areas. He is the one who makes peace. He leads in peacemaking. He is the one who makes up when they have an argument. He leads in that capacity. Okay? He gives. It's understood that one of the greatest gifts a man can experience in life is his wife's receptivity. That when he gives, he enjoys her receiving. Okay? He attends to her. He notices her. He makes sure that she notices that he notices her. He sets and maintains boundaries within and around the family. He acknowledges and nurtures the three entities in a marriage: him, her, and them. Sometimes he has to sacrifice himself for her and for them, or the couple. Sometimes she has to sacrifice herself for him and for the couple. And he creates a safe haven for everyone in the family, but primarily, as in terms of his role as a husband, creates a safe haven for his wife. As a father, and we may discuss this later on, the first job is to make his child feel safe. Not just physically safe, but feel safe from ridicule, humiliation, shame, instability, inconsistency, threats of abandonment, insults. He makes sure that his child understands the difference between punishment and discipline, and the child feels safe from punishment. I'm not saying feel safe from discipline, safe from punishment and harsh judgment. He makes sure that the child understands the difference between being guilty or feeling guilt and feeling shame. He teaches them that they have inherent value as a child of God. He becomes the person that when his child gets into trouble, that's the first person they think of and first person they look to call. In other words, when the child gets into trouble, who comes to mind? Should be him. He strives, as his wife, the child's mother, he strives to become obsolete. Now, what do I mean by that? He will know that when he reaches a certain age and his child reaches a certain age, his child will not need him. So therefore, he is obsolete. That is not to say, however, that the child doesn't want him. But the child should not need him. He will play with his child, and he will allow his child to play. And I'll cut this short because I see Elder Blackwood up there, and I want to share this one piece that I hold dear, is that if he's the father of multiple children, he makes sure that each child believes that they are his only child. Mm-hmm. And with that, I'll just save the rest for later.
I want to thank Dr. Jones. That was a very, very powerful review from a historical perspective to the present on how men have been transformed. And it's, I have quite a few questions. I'm sure that the audience will jump on some of those points and maybe even combat some of those ideas where men are concerned and their function in today's environment. Now, I would like to present at this time Dr. Hugh Carrington. He will look at the spiritual man, and I'm going to ask him to take over right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You will know if you were here this morning that I spent some time speaking and sharing with you. And so I'm going to be very brief, probably about 5 minutes or so or less, to allow for my other colleague to share with you and then for us to have a discussion. So if you were here this morning, you heard it, most of it, and so if you weren't there, maybe I'll speak with you later and share a little bit more. But when we talk about the spiritual man, we're talking about his spirituality influencing every aspect of his life. Every aspect of a man's life is influenced by his spirituality when we talk about the spiritual man. And so as men, as all of us, as human beings, we're good at compartmentalizing things. And men do it very well. This is my life at home. This is my life at work or at school. This is my life at the gym. And so they don't need to know that I'm a Christian when I'm at the gym. Or they don't need to know that I'm a Christian when I'm at work. But the spiritual man, spirituality influences his life across the board. And so we talked about it this morning that as men, the first thing we are priests. We are priests. And so for the spiritual man, that priesthood now becomes very important. We're priests. We're the spiritual leaders of our households. And as Dr. Jones pointed out, we are protectors. And that has been down through the ages. We were there to protect our families, whether it was hunting for food for them to make sure that they were eating, whether from the enemy, the other nations that were attacking, we were protectors. And that role, as I shared with you this morning, has not changed. We're still protectors, but because, first of all, we are priests and spirituality should influence every aspect of our lives, now we're not just protectors, but we're spiritual protectors. And so, yes, as I shared with you this morning, we're going to be the ones to go down into the basement when our wife or the child says, I hear something. But also, we are supposed to be the spiritual protectors standing in the gap between them and the enemy, the ultimate enemy, Satan, who will attack. And then we're providers. Again, as Dr. Jones shared, and you'll probably hear from some of the other panelists, we are providers. Men, over the years, we've been the breadwinners. To buy those homes out in Long Island, we had to work, while the wife stayed where? At home. And so now, because once again, spirituality is influenced in every aspect of our lives, we're not just bringing home, as they would say, the bacon or the veggie links. Come on. We're also now being emotional providers. We're providing emotional stability for our families, mental stability. We talk about mental health today a lot. We're also the providers for our family spiritually, not just about, so it's not just about money when we talk about the spiritual man. And finally, as I shared with you this morning, we are to be peculiar, spiritually peculiar. When we go back to our focus text from this morning, 1 Peter 2 and verse 9, when Peter says to us, we are from a royal priesthood, etc., and he says, you are to be peculiar. And so for the spiritual man, peculiarity should not be something strange to us. In other words, we're going to stand out because, why? We're spiritual. We're not going to carry ourselves, talk the same way, say the same things, eat the same things as everyone else around us. And so because our spirituality is influencing every aspect of our lives, we're going to be different. We're going to stand out. But we're not just peculiar to be odd. And I want that to sink in. All right? We're not just odd and peculiar to be odd, to be different, to be eccentric. But we're spiritually peculiar. And so when we talk about the spiritual man, we're talking about spirituality influencing every aspect of our lives. I'm different. I'm peculiar because I'm spiritual. I'm a provider, but not just a provider financially. I'm a protector, but not just a physical protector, because I am priest. And because I am priest, spirituality undergirds is the foundation of everything that I do.
Those are some very interesting points. And one of the things that the panel will have to answer is whether or not the man who is on the street who is not spiritual is held to the same standard of the man who has Christ in his heart. And if not, what are the passes that we give those kind of men? And so our last presenter is going to show you, Dr. Martin is going to show some data and show you how the 21st century man, basically that man has brought an influx of not only genes, but societal bearings, environmental impact on the influences that are coming at him from the norms. And he's going to show us some data as to what is happening to the 21st century man. Please, Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Blackwood. First, I must commend the men's ministry, and in particular, the team led by Elder Devon Ferdanke for addressing this seminal issue. It's certainly the issue of our time. I will start with the present. I'll go to the past, and I'll return to the present. A cycle. So, if I may, I'll provide some data. If the okay, I will read until we are able to put it on the screen. I will note that in 2024, men constitute just about half of the population, 49.5%, to women's 50.5%. Okay, great. Thank you. So the title that I have for this presentation is The Enlightenment and the Sociological Evolution of the 21st Century Man. I'll begin with the current data. In 2024, as we speak, men and women are about half the population. The lifespan of women is 79 years versus 73 for men. They live longer than us. Home ownership, one of the most important things. Robert Moses built up Levittown, and I can assure you it was almost 100% owned by men. However, as we speak, 11 million women own property, and 8 million men do. Women constitute 13% of the home ownership, men 10%. And it is interesting because women earn 16% less than men. However, there are 30% of women who earn more than men. Women in college, 66% versus 57% for us. And for every 100 men in graduate school, there are 148 for women. In undergraduate school, men 6.5 million versus 8.5 million for women. And in the degree world, women hold 39% versus 36% of men. So you see, more of them are in school than men. That being the case, they earn less than us, but they're also put that money to use. And I'll show you the implications of this. There are, in school, however, the men constitute 64% of the full-time positions, and the women just 58%. And women hold 63% versus 37% of master's degree, and 55% versus 45% for men of doctoral degrees. In the STEM world, however, the science, technology, engineering, and math, men hold 73% of the degrees versus 27% for women. And even the unemployment rate for men is 4.2%, and for women is 4.1%. One caveat, this is for what I call the normal distribution, the society at large. In the black world, in the minority world, these numbers are the differences are much, much greater. And incarceration, 93% of jail inmates are men. Makes sense when you look at the college data. Just 7% for women. However, since 1980, the jail population of women have doubled. In the world, now we know there is a thing called the feminization of religion, just as we have the feminization of poverty, meaning women disproportionately represent these areas. In religion, in the Protestant world, women, 55% of women are versus 45% of men. And Dr. Carrington listened carefully, 64% of women pray every day versus 47% of men. Now, in societies that are enclosed societies, or in societies where there's not much equality, men tend to be more religious, interestingly enough. Again, which it makes sense because it's part of that historical, traditional domination of men and men as the spiritual leader. How did we get here? And what are the implications of this? Well, in 2024, as we speak, there are a number of men. There's a heterosexual man who is attracted to the opposite sex. There's a homosexual man who is attracted to same sex. There's a metrosexual man whose obsession with physical look and presentation warrants, even sometimes exceeds that of women. There's an asexual man who, like they say, like angels, who is neither male nor female. There's a bisexual man who is attracted and has relations with both men and women. There's a biromantic man who is romantically attracted to both men and women. There's a bi-curious man who has curiosity, intense curiosity for both men and women. There's a spornosexual man, which is a bundling of sports and pornography. So that's the man who is totally built up, who is very extroverted in his physical appearance, and that extreme masculinity that Dr. Sam mentioned earlier. Then there's a transgender man who, of course, wants to transition from a man to a woman. And there's a queer man who is just totally different, unique, not in the unique way that Dr. Hugh mentioned, but just queer and different. Now, the nature of man. In 2024, these are the qualities that are most attributable to the ideal man. Honesty comes on top. Financial success, of course, again, to lead the family. Ambition, leadership. Strength, physical toughness. Hard work, ethics. Physical attractiveness. And at the bottom is empathy, kindness, nurturing. For women, the qualities that are most attributable to women, physical beauty, empathy comes in second at 30%, intelligence comes next, honesty followed by honesty, ambition, and financial success. So what happened? I wish I could get the data on the screen. But let's go back to the Stone Age. 3.3 million to 5,000 years ago. And by the way, if your Homo erectus is 6,000 years old or 3 million years old, it does not matter. The sequence remains the same. Men were leaders, protectors, providers. They lived from subsistence farming. They were what they call hunter-gatherers. These were what we know as the cavemen. Life expectancy about 33 years. They hunted large animals. They wore woolly garments. They used stone tools to cut, to pound and crush, right? They used these tools. They were better at killing animals and for extracting the flesh. They used stone-tipped spears. And they learned to domesticate animals. What were the women doing during this period of time in the Stone Age? Well, having babies, taking care of the family, taking care of the tribe, and providing support. We'll go to the Bronze Age, 5,000 years to 1,400 years ago, from, say, 1,200 BCE, before the Common Era. What were men doing? Men were leaders, protectors, providers, warriors. In fact, at this point in the Bronze Age, war was their main thing. Masculinity, bravery, conquering. They were military trained, they were tough, and their life expectancy was about 30 to 45 years. Now, during the Bronze Age, the bronze made better weapons than stone, so war took on a much more important way of life. In the Peloponnesian War and the war in Sparta and Athens, in these Greek city-states, you had the 100-year war, you had the 30-year war, so that all these wars were part of the image of man, bravery, toughness. And again, we see elements of that up to this day, as Dr. Sam mentioned. They lived mainly on meat, right? They hunted herds, and they began to fan out. In other words, previously you'd follow the herds, but now as you develop some type of agriculture, you build settlements. They build settlements for the tribe, and they moved and developed settlements all over. And during the Bronze Age, we had the development of the wheel and the writing systems. And by the way, those of us who love porridge was invented during that time, during the Bronze Age. Now, women, they traveled frequently, right? They spread culture and ideas and technology. They performed physical labor. However, their primary domain was the home. They wore long woolen skirts, and they began to emancipate. So they leave this area, and they would accompany the father of their children, their husbands, as it were, and they would build homes with their reproductive partner. In fact, some archaeologists found that in Spain, even during the Bronze Age, there were women who had a measure of political power in certain developments. However, their primary domain was the home. In the Iron Age, 1200 BC to 500 BC, what were men? What were men known for? Leaders, protectors, warriors, providers, brave, strong, tough. They were trained warriors. Life expectancy was about 30 to 40 years on average. Now, during much of the Iron Age, which started, by the way, in the Middle East and parts of Africa, they began to make weapons based on iron and steel. Again, the macho man, the warrior, strong, decisive, accomplished, a killing machine. And by the way, these were the qualities that the women would look for in husbands. So they lived in clans at the time, and they were led by warrior kings. Again, we have these city-states. We had the city-states all over Europe, and they fought each other virulently. And war was the main thing. And in the Iron Age, they were able to develop better weapons of war. Again, they ate meat. They ate wild boar, beef, mutton. So the goat is coming from a long way. And they developed cattle, sheep, and stuff like eggs and chickens, animals that they domesticated. What was the role of women? Women were responsible for managing the household, cultivating the land, while men were primarily involved in warfare. And even though women fought along men sometimes, primarily, they were always under the authority of men. The classical civilization from, say, 500 BC to 500 AD, and by the way, it includes the Christ during the period of time for Christ. I won't go into a number of the issues that Dr. Sam raised, because we talk about the Roman men and the absolute authority of the Roman man. And by the way, the Roman man was the spiritual leader of the home. He was the provider of the home. He was the protector of the home. And he was the overall leader of the home. However, the Roman Empire was a little like, it was not dynamic in the sense that it was sort of stable. Of course, they have their outposts all over, and they get their mercenaries to come and fight far-flung wars. But the empire itself was a structure, and they started thinking about leadership and provider and strong. So now they are like emperors and senators and proconsuls and praetors. So these are some of the leadership role that they developed for men, since they did not have to fight so much. Many times they used their mercenaries to fight for them. But the male qualities during the Roman Empire: courage, strength, intelligence, independence, loyalty, power and status. And of course, their power was so absolute that they could actually kill their children. If the child was born, and if they failed within a certain period of time to go and look at the child or accept the child is likely to be killed. Very similar to the cubs and the lions and the pride. Verlin can tell us some more about that later on. So their power was so absolute that they could kill, and yet they were the spiritual leaders of the home. Same thing in Sparta and Greece. And remember, the women who got married to these men, they were like 12, 13, 14 years old, the average age of the bride during that time. So we see that the success of men now became political. Dr. Sam also touched on that, started attending political meetings, and they are now part of the power structure to make decisions regarding the path of the empire, as they sort of shied away from the physical warfare aspect of it. But women continue to be the symbol of domestic life. She was subject to her lord and master, which is how she saw her husband. And they had no civil rights, and they were dominated by men in all aspects of their lives. Greek women were the same. In the Greco-Roman world, no rights, and women were considered inferior to men. They played a very submissive role. So we see up to this point, again, women's role remain local, domesticated during the classical civilization. Now we go to the Middle Ages, from say 500 BC to about 1500 AD or BC AD, the common CE rather, the common era. Now, you know, feudalism, the so-called Dark Ages, we had feudalism, or you are either part of the royal court, or a knight, or a peasant, or a serf, which is tantamount to slavery as a serf. You're born a serf, you die a serf, and your kin is a serf. So at all levels, from the royal court to the knights to the serfs, the man was the king of the home. Men were leaders, they were thinkers, and a lot of the in terms of Catholicism, the development of Catholicism, Dr. Sam touched on that, how the church, as they moved away from war, the church became that center of gravity for men, where they exerted influence and leadership. Women basically had little or no role to play. They oversaw the household activities such as cooking, brewing, spinning, you know, making cloth. And women were generally considered lower than men, and they were not trusted in the same way. So whatever the level, the serf was still king of his house. The peasant was king of his home. And if you elevate farther up to the knight and to the royal court, again, women were totally subjugated. And as we know, kings killed at will. You know, Richard the Lionheart, Edward VIII, even the would-be King Oliver Cromwell, they just killed at will. Again, part of that structural, traditional, institutional power and authority that were given to men. Now we come to the modern era, which is about from, say, 1500 to the present, and something transformative happened. This period, of course, includes the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment. Now, during the Renaissance, of course, coming out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance, society developed insights. We had interest in classical learning, humanism. They are questioning established authority, especially the authority of the church, meaning the Catholic Church, who ruled everything during the Dark Ages. And this exposure, writers, during this time, the piano was invented. During this time, classical pieces and works and books and authors talking about the rights of man and all the questioning of tradition, rejection of religious dogma. That's what happened during this period of time. So the Reformation and the Renaissance encouraged critical thinking, and we now focused on human potential, and humanistic thought came about, and the Age of Enlightenment. Universities were created, different schools of thought, and the first concert halls were created during this time. This led to this other areas of the modern era, where we come to the age of discovery, coming into the 20th century. At the turn of the century, we had World War I, then we had World War II, then from then, we had structures supporting the rights, structures supporting women's rights. We had the United Nations, we had the rise of the United States as a superpower. We had the emergence of, say, the emergence of the European Union, the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement. All these things coming into the 1960s affirmed the rights of man, just as how the voting rights liberated blacks, the civil rights and the feminist movement liberated women, and women now became a part of society. Women started learning, women started getting involved in society. We had the decolonization in the 1960s. You'll notice that most of the Caribbean islands got their independence somewhere from 1960 to 1970, somewhere there, right? So these structures created a more open environment, a more what we call liberal democracy, and women benefited from this. Women now became more accomplished. Women started going to school. Women developed responsibilities. They developed confidence, self-confidence, and they became driven, and they became active members in the society. And of course, we had female world leaders like Gandhi in Germany, Merkel in Gandhi in India, and Merkel in Germany, and Thatcher in the UK. And to this day, we have, in 2024, a female major party candidate for president who, God willing, is expected to become the 47th president of the United States with her husband, Doug Emhoff. Now, he happens to become the first second gentleman in the history of the world. So this would be this would be as if during the Roman Empire or in early civilization, you have a woman taking the leadership. Of course, we had Cleopatra. We also had the Queen of Sheba. We had these, but these were exceptions. We are talking about average women who have developed, who have come on their own, and to be full participants in society. So, in conclusion, I'll note that in an article a few days ago by the UK Mail, the Daily Mail, the British newspaper, they noted that, and I'm quoting this, Emhoff, the first second gentleman in American history, has been credited with redefining masculinity by quitting his career as a lawyer and taking a backseat to his wife's political ambitions. This, I hold, is the most visible model of this phenomenon. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of lesser-known couples have experienced this, usually through necessity and circumstances. This has been normalized. Women, they're on the rise. Women are challenging the traditions of men due to their emergence from a period of subjugation for the last maybe 3 million years. So we see that these factors, particularly in the Western liberal democracies, they have created the conditions that negates the traditional gender roles handed down to us through history and biology. Society will, wittingly or unwittingly, adapt. Women, biology notwithstanding, are equal partners and sometimes the leaders and the breadwinners in the home and society. Ultimately, society must transition to a new model of masculinity, not one based on physical strength, warrior mentality, earnings capacity, tradition, or gender, but one that's negotiated between them as they accept and as they prosecute their new roles in society. This, I hold, is the new social order that the Enlightenment period has brought on us. In other words, this is the product of the Enlightenment, and we go back to the statistics here, where we talk about the number of women who are in college, their earning potential, and how they have transcended men. And this challenges the prevailing view of men, and ultimately, we must adapt to this new order because, as Kamala Harris says, they are saying, we are not going back. Thank you.
Wow, so we have so much to ask these panelists because I just got a question from online which you'll think about as we take a break for the band, the AY band to play for us, and at the same time we'll collect the evening's offering. It seems that the man of today has been morphed into a confused person. Based on the history I've presented and based on the present phenomena that exists, basically endorsed by the presentation of Dr. Martin. So who is man today? And so maybe you might be able to condense that into some forms so that some of our online viewers and members of this congregation can benefit from. So at this time, we're going to listen to the AY band, and at the same time, we have the members of the diaconate and the ushers board to take our evening's offering. Thank you. Okay, do you know another song? Play another verse, please. Thank you. let's say it again. That's a beautiful rendition from our AY band. Now we don't have to pay for any more singing. So we have two mics that are set up in each aisle. Could you borrow one of these mics and put there, and please bring the mics a little closer. Up front here, bring that mic up front, and that one also a little closer. And you can sort of get to each mic, and can we borrow one mic and we share, yeah? Okay, so you're welcome to ask your questions, and we have a panelist here that is well able to answer all your questions. My first input in this is, thank you so much. You know, I go back to some old information that, you know, Socrates, he believed that man had an immortal soul, and that soul was good. And man could only be corrupted by his environment. What you presented this evening is very, very insightful as to how the duties and the expectations of man has developed or transformed based on societal norms. So the question that I want to ask the panel, do you really would accept and submit now that man is a product of his environment? Anybody?
Well, as sociologists, I must say yes. We are socialized. Our primary socializer is our families. Then we go to our peer groups, etc. And so, yes, we're a product. We are a product of our environment.
Any other input?
Yes, I would say physically we are a product of our environment because our environment here affects us. For example, just this morning while my wife and I were coming to church, we were having a discussion, and we were heading down Atlantic Avenue where we were passing, the train tracks, and while we were talking, the train came by, and it was so loud that we couldn't hear each other's conversation. We even wound up the window of the car, and we still couldn't hear. What I'm trying to say is everything around us does affect us physically. Sometimes we get hyperstimulated. Sometimes, when we travel outside of an area where there's so much stimuli, we get peace. So yes, we are a product of our environment, whether short-term and long-term.
In the field of economics, there is a principle called dialectical materialism, which says, it actually supplements what the sociologist says, that in the world of economics, dialectical materialism says that everything in the world, including man and his development, is affected by the physical environment around him.
Okay, and Dr. Jones?
Yes, so from the psychological point of view, it's a combination of nurture and nature. So there's a blank slate. Well, we're not blank slates when we come into the world. There are things written on that slate, and our environment will write things on that slate, but the slate itself is determined by our genetics and other factors. And the environment also is not just when we come into the world, the environment is prenatal as well. The child in utero is affected by the external environment. Children in utero can hear, and they can see light, and they respond to sounds, they respond to light. They also respond to the mother's emotional state. Okay? So it's a combination of nature and nurture that molds the person into who they are.
Okay, Thank you very much. Questions? If you won't have a question, you can come on either side of the aisle and just stand at the mic so that we can see it. Go ahead. Turn it on, sir. Flip it from the side up.
I thought I would have heard much more from Nurse Dexter. I recall many years ago, I was walking the street and a noise came into my head that said, "Go and get a colonoscopy, go and get a colonoscopy." And I ignored it. Then this noise came out again, many months after, "Go and get a colonoscopy." I have no idea where the noise came from, but I was assuming it was the Holy Spirit. So I did go to get a colonoscopy, and the doctor gave me an examination. Sorry, he did surgery and showed me cancerous polyps in my colon. Now I listened to that voice, and I'm alive today. There are many black men who are dying because of colon cancer, and there's no one to correct them or instruct them. I have several friends who have died of colon cancer. I went to a funeral one evening at the Bethel Church, and the man lying in the box and I were the same age. Colon cancer. If you got a sister, or cousin, or anybody, please instruct this man to go and see the doctor. Please. Because I don't understand why men don't like going to the doctor. I was in the laundromat several months ago, and this young man came in and bragged me. He went to the doctor, and the doctor used his finger and slapped the doctor and walked out of the doctor's office. And we were all looking there, and no one laughed. We didn't think it was funny. But he's no longer alive today. Colon cancer is a killer among black men. It needs to be stressed. It needs to be spoken of. When you reach the age of 40, you should have had your first prostate exam. 40. If you wait too late, it's going to be too late. And many men walk around not having any pain nor anything wrong with them until they discover they have colon cancer and they're already in the box.
Thank you very much. A very, very beautiful point in terms of screenings that are available for men. It's Men's Day. Do not delay. Utilize all the opportunities and avenues out there waiting for you.
Good evening, gentlemen. I truly enjoyed the panel discussion. Welcome home, Dr. Jones. As a supporter of men, mother of a man, I have students that are men. And I want to ask this question. Actually, I have two. One is, in this world, in today's time, which is very challenging, as you know, between media, expectations, all of the information that we received from Dr. Jones and Dr. Martin in terms of historical information and the political way in which our country is going, what and how do we reach young men in our church and even in our communities where we are? How do we reach them? How do we talk to them about being a man? Or especially our young people, they're young people that I see on a weekly basis. And then they have questions of their own, like how do they start relationships, with the Me Too movement, all that sort of stuff going on. So there are a lot of things that are hitting our young men in every phase of life, from teenagedom all the way to 60s, 70s, 80s. So how do we talk to our young men where they are to help them to have a sense of who a man can be and should be?
I think that's a very poignant question, and who would like to answer that?
I'm sorry.
I will start by saying that's an extraordinarily critical and important question. In the Jewish world, they don't have that problem. You go up to Eastern Parkway, to Park Slope, Crown Heights, rather, you will see the young boys with the men they go to the academy, they go to study, they go to talk. And the residual benefit from that, as we know, they build strong communities, they know their history, they are high achievers, they are competent. Unfortunately, in our community, particularly the black community, and we need it more than anyone else, we don't have a structure, we don't have a system to do that. We don't have a mechanism to systematically do that. That is that's a deficit, and we as a church probably should do more, definitely should do more to foster that. It has not been part of our tradition, but it is urgent, and I think we need to do that. I think that's a serious deficit in our community.
Amen. Anybody else?
I
want
just
a
wanted to
follow-up
say,
question? Yes.
to what you just said, it's so true that you said about the Jewish community. Even the Jews that don't practice the faith, they still send their kids to Hebrew school. There's still expectations. Now, I know it used to be that we used to have a lot of banquets and fashion shows and things like that. And we try, even here in our church, we used to have a program for the young ladies, phenomenal ladies. And then we tried to start something for the men. In Washington, Maryland, I think at Brinklow Church, it's two or three churches that get together. They have an annual debutante and botillion where the men as well as the young ladies from, I think it's seniors and junior and senior in high school on to like maybe freshmen in college. They have a whole thing where they have to study before, and then and different things like a rites of passage, and then they eventually have this lovely, big ball where they're kind of coming out like our other counterparts do. And I just always wondered, and then a couple of years ago, someone and I were thinking about having a mentorship program, but, SDA-wide, because we have so many wonderful professionals like yourselves and others here in our church that we can mentor. So I just wondered, do you think things like that, like having an event or having mentorship, do you think those are things that would help, and how would we go about doing that?
Yes, those things will help. Subcultures that have initiation or transitional ceremonies tend to have lower crime rates. The most violent people in our society, in the West, are young men, adolescent men, for a number of biological and sociological reasons. And Muslims have the lowest arrest rates in New York City and probably in the entire country, as do Orthodox Jews. And that's partly because of the ritual of bar mitzvah and other transitional pieces. But in addition to having those societal structures, we also need to help our young men develop emotional intelligence, to know what they feel, find appropriate ways of expressing what they feel, and not suppressing them. Because the suppressed emotions are going to be expressed one way or the other. And if they're not expressed consciously, they'll be expressed unconsciously. And that's where we get destructive behavior. We often are afraid to hug our sons. We need to hug our sons. It's not going to turn them into soft people. The opposite is true. The sons who are hugged and feel safe become very masculine and very confident in their masculinity, so therefore they don't need to develop hypermasculinity, which then leads to some of these social problems that we have. Okay? And helping them feel that they are going to be disciplined instead of being punished is also part of that. And the discipline has to be consistent and predictable, but not harmful.
Thank you very much. I think that we can allow for 10 minutes more in a Q&A. And we have, yeah, please, you can go to the microphone. I think the question that our online viewer asked is an interesting question. Men today have morphed into a confused state. We're not sure, well, I'm just paraphrasing, who a man should be. So before this panel leave the platform, maybe we can answer that question from the online viewer. What is it that you anticipate or would suggest 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the modern man, the man of today should be? So let's hear a question.
Good evening, gentlemen. The viewer just took my question, actually, the last person. In your introduction, you stated that we're not going to, the panel will not focus on the biblical man, right? But in the presentations, I recognize there's a confused man. As a woman in my 60-ish time, the women are also now confused because the men are confused. So, if we go to look at the transformational man as 2024 and beyond, would not this confusion extend into eternity? 1. 2, women in my age group, my friends, are not married because they cannot find the male. And I'm not talking black male, Muslim male, the male. So we are confused. My question is, through the time through the times of transformation, will we humans not have to return to the spiritual man, the man that God created in the Garden of Eden? Is that not the man for us? Will not that lessen the confusion among the male, the female, the young boys? I remember when Jordan Peterson, the psychoanalyst from Canada, when he stood up and started to defend the boys, he was castigated in the press internationally. And he stated, no one was defending the young men. I had to step in and make some kind of framework so these young men would not remain in confusion. Can we really retain the transformational man? Is that not confusion? Is not that breaking down the family? Lastly, President Biden said he's proud of his record in his term, that he and his group, I think it's 247 pieces of legislation on the transgender human. Is that not confusion? And as a church, should we really be focusing on the transformational man, or should we be focusing on the biblical man?
Okay, who would like to answer that question?
Well, I believe that the focus on the transformational man is because society is changing. And so I don't know that as a church we're focused on that. As a church, we're cognizant, we're aware that the change is happening. But from my perspective, the spiritual man is the man. Priest, provider, yes, financially, but also providing emotional support for his family, protector, etc. And then this peculiarity that we talk about being different from any other man. So the transformation is happening. The church, we are looking on and we're seeing the transformation take place, but I don't know that we are in support, at least I'm not, of this transformational man. So when we talk about where we are today in 2024 in a transformational man, when we look back historically, if we look today and said, well, we're expecting the man to be more caring, more emotional, all of these things, that has never changed from the biblical man. Are you with me? So the biblical man was supposed to be, or is supposed to be, caring and emotionally intelligent and all of these things that we expect him to be. Terms that we didn't use 30, 40, 50 years ago, we're using today. But the principle hasn't changed. Yes, you're a priest. Yes, you're a leader. Yes, you're a provider. But you are still supposed to be loving and caring and supportive. We see that as a transformation because you were brutal and hard and whatever years ago. But what we see today is what was expected of the man years ago and is expected of him today.
Well,
that might be debatable. I mean, seeing that some of the fathers were not tolerant of any disagreement in the family and would execute an hardship on the children or whatever it is. So it can be argued that some of our ancestors were not the model that we have talked about before, but I think the principle that you mentioned is of the essence.
Yes, the principle is of the essence. Yes, some of our forefathers, the way, and especially in our West Indian communities, discipline was executed, right? And we may not have seen the love that was there. But what God intended, as was pointed out, discipline, but discipline with love.
Okay. Bobby, you want to, Dr. Martin?
yeah, during the Stone Age and prehistory, boys had a structure. They were out with the men, their fathers and others. They were conditioned. They went through certain rituals in terms of how they became a man. And the rituals and the structure of their traditional society groomed them, right? Groomed them. So they had a structure. The Jews, they have a structure. The Muslims, they have a structure. Secular humanism does not have a structure. Secular humanism, where the issue is the unbridled facilitating of individualism, and again, it comes from the area of capitalism, where capitalism says that the individual initiative and assuming the risk is what keeps the economy going, and that's what they call, that has produced the production function, the most productive economic system the world has ever seen, based on individualism. So secular humanism does not have that. And I think the confusion comes out of the absence of a structure. Religions, generally speaking, provide a structure for these things, for a structure how you're going to live your life, a structure for the vision of your life. And I think secular humanism does not. So we have the challenge where, as my thesis offers, everything from the Enlightenment propelled women forward, and with the advancement of women, they are now in a position where it challenges the traditional view of masculinity, of what a man should be. Personally, I expect that to continue because society is moving away from religion. Society is moving away from religion, particularly in the Western world and Europe. In the East and the Far East and these traditional societies, they still have their own systems that provide that structure for the development of a positive, productive male. In the Western world, because of the principle of individualism and the prominence of secular humanism, there is not a structure to provide that, that development in a positive way for men. We don't know what men are supposed to be like, and anything goes, generally speaking, in the Western world.
I have some friends online here from the estates of Georgia watching the program. And we are in an Adventist church now. So can we, just for a moment, speak to our Adventist men? What are the things that are expected of them as a man, as a Seventh-day Adventist man?
All right, from a health point of view, I would like to address what Brother Pilgrim said. From a Seventh-day Adventist man, we are responsible for protecting our bodies. So we are responsible for getting ourselves checked. We are responsible for getting our health checkups. I was guilty of ignoring getting checked up, and I was holding off having a colonoscopy done, for quite some time, and I eventually went and had one done not too recently, about a year or so ago, and it turned out when I came at the right time because there was a polyp found and it was precancerous. It was right there, and my brother, when I let him know what was going on with me, he went and he got himself checked, and he was precancerous as well. So as Adventist men, we are responsible for being here for one another, being here for our families. So part of that responsibility is getting ourselves checked, seeing the doctor, getting our regular checkups, and we need to ask certain questions, ask about concerns and not be afraid.
As I'm not going to speak as an authority on Adventism, what I will say is that as an Adventist man, this is a personal opinion now, we need to be very, very careful about the political climate we're in. And I invite you to read a book by John Eldridge called Wild at Heart, Discovering the Secret of a Man's Soul. And also, Google Doug Wilson. The reason I'm saying this is that there is a strain of Christianity in this country right now that is more of an ideology, okay? And it's a departure from what I believe the Adventist man should be. The departure takes people in the direction of those who think that Jesus Christ wore a dress. And therefore, we must all become warriors and raise our children and treat our wives in a certain way. I don't believe that the Adventist man is the warrior the way these folks define manhood to be. I believe the Adventist man is the man who believes in the Beatitudes, who understands the power of turning the other cheek, who understands the impact and the value of feeding those who are hungry and providing clothes for those who are naked and places to shelter. Think of provide and protect. Provide not just material things, but provide guidance. Protect not just from the outside enemy, but from yourself. Okay? Can you provide an environment where your children feel protected from you and your wrath, and feel safe enough to be with you and to want to call you when they are in trouble, and feel safe that you will protect them, yes, from the outside enemy, but also protect them from you? Okay. I think that's what the Adventist man is. The Adventist man is not a wimp. Okay. He's a very strong person, but that does not need to brandish a sword and be very loud and self-centered and critical of others so that he looks above them.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, we have one, yes.
So I just want to thank each of you for taking the time to present on the areas that you presented on. And I may have missed, but in today's society, there are a lot of
Let me say that's a powerful comment by our member. Unfortunately, that ship has sailed, and the shift has found us in a quandary. I think that the message to the Adventist male is exactly what Dr. Jones just said. We cannot be wishy-washy with what we believe or be standing on shifting sand. We have to be grounded in God's word and form a philosophy of life that's biblically based and not reading from TikTok and on all the different, but then we'll be lost and be led astray. Any other comment?
I think he has brought up a seminal issue. The 30% of women, and again, in the black community, it's more than 30%, but the 30% of women who earn more than men, it has consistently caused stress in the home. In fact, when I talk to many of my friends about that, I've always said that the smart women who are the breadwinners, the smart ones will provide the husband with the illusion that he's the decision maker. Those who are unsophisticated and those who are not wise will allow it to become a wedge, because their priorities will prevail. They will say, it is my money, it is my earnings, so I have a right to determine how it's going to be used. And they may even say, well, you know, I'm smarter than you, I can make these decisions in a much wiser way than you. But the smart ones will make the men think that they are the ones making this. So that's a big challenge, not just in Adventism, but throughout the world. And it comes down to the individual woman. How will you manage this? Will you use that fact as a sledgehammer on your husband? Or will you be smart enough to allow him to think on others? And will the man accept it? It's very challenging for many men. I think that's where the problem is. The men being able to handle that situation.
Which even drives home the point now of the man being priest of the household. Because if he's not the breadwinner or the primary breadwinner, then he's not also allowed to be the priest of the household. And so, yes, to Bobby's point, those women who are able, even though they are making more, to allow to navigate that situation in their household to a point where he is allowed to be priest and he is allowed to make the major financial decisions, even though he is not the primary, or the percentage that he is bringing home is much less. But there are households, as Bobby pointed out, where women are able to, emotional intelligence. They have the emotional intelligence to be able to navigate those situations, and they have happy households. Where it becomes an issue, and this is all, and I'm going to get in trouble, it all goes back now to the foot of the woman. In being able to allow, because here's the thing, I can't be priest if I'm not allowed to be priest.
Right, so you're not in the islands where you'll try to do it by force.
You can't. And so it is
Yeah. Well, you know, I tell you this has been a very, very stimulating. Okay, so we'll give 5 minutes more, and then we will. Somebody else would like to say something? Yes, sir, please.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
The Bible was saying out of the school, but it should not be taken out of the house.
Thank you so much. Amen. Okay. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Etta Ramdath, and as you're talking about the mothers without husbands and all these children and young men growing up without fathers, and what are we, or you, or all educated men, will do in the black community for these children, these young men that is just roaming around while there is really so much education and things for them to do, but they have no direction. I was baptized in Queens. I live in Texas for the past 30 years, but at the time, there was a brother here today. I didn't get to see him, Lester Parkinson. He was a teenager at the time when I was in the church there. And there was a pastor Lister. Now, all these kids roaming around on the street here, educated men like you could bring them together in order to mold them into real men. Although they are not Adventists, they would become Adventists, because I saw Pastor Lister when he took the church in Queens. He started having a basketball game. And all those kids around Jamaica that was walking on the street, sitting on the steps, doing things, they came into the church because of the basketball game on Tuesdays. He used to have it. And that church was so full with kids that there was no place to sit.
And so, pardon me, do you have a direct question?
Yeah, well, I'm saying what could be done to bring these kids that you have to get a hold on them.
Yes.
You would begin something to bring them in.
Thank you so much.
You know.
Is there anybody on the panel who would like to answer that question?
I think we believe that that is all of our intent, our desire, is to make sure that our young people are addressed. What we also need to keep in mind is that the young person must also have a desire to be helped. Because I can have all the basketball games, but if he or she never comes off the street, then I'm not going to be able to reach them. So I hear you. I am in agreement with you. It's the same thing that Sister Lina is speaking about, that we need to begin to implement programs and activities that will be attracted to them, that they will come, be part of, and be role models. And I think that's what you're looking for. You're looking for us to be some role models to the individuals in the young folks in our community.
It's a challenge to the men's ministry leader and department of our church. You have heard some of the suggestions, and now it's in your hand to help them implement it. We take the last question.
My elder, can I say one thing? I believe you already started it today. You started to set the example, so that's good growth right there and then.
Thank you.
I received this message from someone who's listening online. Can you ask a question for me about Adventist men? What would you do, or what should you do, when there is a man in the home who is an Adventist, a Christian, and he's supposed to be a father and a leader in his home, but doesn't perform his duties as a man should? What should you do with this man?
I will provide a superficial response. My dad used to say, again, he had 8 boys, and my dad's narrative was that the worst Adventist guy is better than the best worldly non-Adventist guy, right? So there's a stereotypical view that the Adventist male, the Adventist guy, is someone who exhibits very desirable qualities that a mate would be looking for. And many times that happens not to be the case. So I think that, again, the normal distribution is there that tells us that this is the case, but there will always be exceptions to the normal distribution.
A sad commentary is a sad commentary on a male in a home, an Adventist male in that situation, because we have all the tools, all the schools, the health message, we have all the directives and all the help that can make us better men. My encouragement to all of you is to utilize all those avenues and opportunities to grow. So I hear that question.
What should the person do?
Yes,
I cannot say that.
I can
cannot
offer.
tell you to kick her out or kick him out.
I can offer what might not be the magic bullet, but the person can start. Maybe they've already done this, but they can start by very clearly, firmly, but not in a hostile way, asking him, what does he need? She can go to him and say, what do you need? And see what he says.
Okay.
And hopefully that question would lead them to get some counseling. And not just from the pastor, no disrespect to any pastor, but if that pastor does not have a clinical background, he's just a pastor, doesn't have any training, social work, clinical, etc., may not be the best place to stop. You can start there with them getting some counseling. Hey, you need to get your life in order, you need to get some help. I have someone that I can refer you to, but cannot just stop at the pastor. And too often in our churches, I think we stop there. It's a good place to begin. I think our pastors are trained to be able to provide that initial level of counseling, but sometimes an additional help is needed. And so with that question, what do you need? Maybe the next step is, okay, I hear you, now let's get some help so that you can get some help in what you need.
This has been a very, very vibrant and involved conversation this evening on a man and his purpose. I want to thank Drs. Jones, Carrington, Martin, and Greenwood for the erudite and clear conversations on man from a historical perspective and the place that you fill in this 21st century. And I want to thank the audience online and thank you locally for your participation in this evening's program. God bless you and have a pleasant week. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you again, and I want to thank the audience for coming out, and the online viewers, and the band, and the Thomas brother, Elijah, that performed for us. Amen. And to close us out, Pastor, we ask you to come and say a prayer as we leave this place.
Dr. Blackwood thanked the distinguished panelists, and the little that I got has been so informative, and it's a wonderful thing to know that we have professionals who are so endowed to make this kind of deposit in our lives, critical areas to address, but nobody in the vote of thanks remembered Dr. Blackwood, our moderator. He did a great job, didn't he? Yes. So let's put our hands together for him. Let us bow our heads in prayer. Father, we understand that in this changing environment, we are pressed to make adjustments, perceptional, relational, spiritual, so that we could be sure to meet all needs and leave no one behind. As challenging as it is, I pray that we would rise to the task knowing that we are well able through your power to meet the needs, the pressing needs that confront us within our church and our community. We leave with a resolve and hope that you who started the good work in us will finish it. We yield ourselves to your will. Grant that the openness and the expansion of our minds and hearts will dispose us in such a way that we would be more able to reach the unreached. We thank you once again, and we praise you for what our ears have heard, our hearts have felt, from morning until now. Now take us home in safety and peace, we pray. Bring us back for fellowship when we assemble once again. In Jesus' name, amen.